Climate Outlook Forum as we take a look at what to expect for the Atlantic hurricane season. Thank you all for joining us this morning. And I am pleased, or I have the honor to welcome the Honorable Kenneth Bryan, who is the Minister of Tourism and Ports of the Cayman Islands and Chairman of the Caribbean Tourism Organization. And he will deliver opening remarks. Over to you, Minister Bryan.
Colleagues, ministers and commissioners of tourism, directors of tourism, permanent secretaries, tourism officers, and representatives from the CTO membership countries, representatives of the CTO allied and affiliate members, heads and representatives of the National Hotel and Tourism Associations, regional and international development partners, members of the media, and to our virtual audience, a special good morning to you. As the chairman of the Caribbean Tourism Organization, it is my distinct pleasure to welcome each of you to this Hurricane Preparedness and Climate Outlook Forum. Today's virtual seminar is the first in a series of disaster preparedness and climate resilience that the CTO will be hosting as a part of our preparedness activities for the year 2023 Atlantic hurricane season. I thank you for joining us, particularly as today marks day one of the hurricane season. It is said that the price that we pay for living in the beautiful Caribbean is that we are faced with a variety of weather-related threats that can have hugely detrimental effects on human life, property, livelihoods, businesses, investment, and the environment. Hydrometeorological and hydroclimatic events such as tropical storms and hurricanes, accompanied by strong winds, storm surges, and floods, represent the most frequently occurring hazards within the Caribbean. But we also face very real impacts posed by global climate change, ranging from dry spells and droughts affecting our water supplies and resources, heat waves affecting the health of our tourism employees and visitors alike, rising sea levels, accelerating beach erosion, and thereby increasing the vulnerability of tourism facilities, many of which are located in low-lying coastal areas, rising sea temperatures contributing to coral bleaching and the demise of this valuable natural resource. From many of our islands, corals that are not only tourist attractions, but nurseries for our fish life. The Caribbean region, and by extension, our regional tourism sector, confronts these and other climate-related hazards on an ongoing basis. And it should be noted that they each have the power and the ability to seriously threaten the future development and sustainability of the Caribbean tourism product. It is therefore imperative that the sector is equipped to mitigate, prepare for, respond to, and recover from the very real risks posed by the multi-hazards which confront our region. In today's forum, we will hear from regional experts from the Caribbean Institute for Meteorology and Hydrology, CIMH, and the Caribbean Disaster Emergency Management Agency, more commonly referred to as CDEMA, who will present the hurricane season forecast for 2023 and share mitigation and preparedness strategies. Best practices for hazard response and recovery are equally important subject areas and will be covered in the next forum. In the Caribbean context, managing risk from natural hazards and building our resilience against climate change draw on the same interventions, practices, and principles predicated on safeguarding lives, livelihoods, properties, and investments. Even as we continue to navigate through the remnants of COVID-19, the development of a sustainable tourism industry requires a multi-pronged approach that must include the formulation of an adequate policy of safeguards. It calls for both government and private sector to work collaboratively in the development of plans and strategies to reduce risk and vulnerability. Even more importantly, it warrants being proactive and being willing to take the necessary actions to increase the resilience of our destinations, and by extension, our tourism sector, through actions such as infrastructure improvements, investments in early warning systems, engaging in joint advocacy, effective communication and media management before and after times of crisis, and an education and awareness for visitors and residents alike, all underpinned by a robust digitally technology and information communication systems. We are all aware of the benefits of tourism, and travel extends far beyond the direct spending of our travelers to the countries of the Caribbean. Tourism is a powerful economic engine which fuels our economies, drives new business and investment, provides linkages with other economic sectors, and generates revenues from taxes, duties, and fees that are all essential to the development and the provision of infrastructure and government services. Given its pivotal role as a region, we must, out of necessity, seriously pursue and implement the actions and the solutions that will enable long-term tourism resilience. I therefore call upon us all, as individual, as regional destinations, as leaders and decision makers, and as a unified Caribbean tourism sector, to renew our commitment and our responsibility to safeguard our people and visitors within the region, the planet, our properties, and our infrastructure investments, which will ensure that this Caribbean paradise that we all call home remain globally competitive and maintains its appeal as a safe destination to live, visit, and invest in. With all that in mind, I am heartened by the level of participation and the interest in today's event. And I want to thank you all for joining us, and once again, welcome you to this virtual Hurricane Preparedness and Climate Outlook Forum. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister Bryan, for sharing these tremendous insights and inspiring words. Certainly a call to action. And my hope is that it acts as a catalyst for us all to be more proactive and diligent to take the actions required in order to tackle the many challenges which you highlighted that confront the tourism sector and the region. Before I introduce the first panelist, just a few housekeeping announcements. So in today's forum, we will hear from each panelist, after which there will be a brief opportunity for Q&A. We welcome questions and comments from the audience, and participants wishing to do so are asked to use the Zoom Q&A feature at any time during the forum. Secondly, the session is being recorded, and we will share a link to access the video recording via CTO's YouTube following the event. And should we run short on time, as it relates to any questions, we encourage our panelists to type written responses to questions posed in the Q&A feature on the Zoom platform. So I now have the pleasure of introducing the first presenter, Dr. Cédric van Meerbeeck, who is the climatologist at the Caribbean Institute for Meteorology and Hydrology, and he will deliver a presentation on the seasonal outlook for June to November 2023. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Amanda, and thank you, CTO, for inviting the Caribbean Institute for Meteorology and Hydrology to share a few words on what we can expect in the coming months and what will be the implications of the climate events that we expect. Thank you also, Minister Bryan, for the inspiring words. And you hit the nail on the head when you said that our climate is really like a paradise, but with a price that we sometimes have to pay, which is that it goes together with a couple of hazards, which can sometimes really cripple our economies, our lives, our livelihoods, our businesses, and our environment. So with those words, I would like to share my screen and ask of you to confirm, Amanda, if you can see the screen.
Correct. Yes, we are.
Okay, excellent. So what are we in the business of? Primarily at the Caribbean Institute for Meteorology and Hydrology's Regional Climate Center for the Caribbean. It is to provide the Caribbean public and Caribbean sectors with pertinent information on how climate is currently, how it changes over time. So that's what we call climate change. And within that changing climate, if there are any hazards of concern at any point in time, how bad would they be? And on the other hand, are there any opportune outcomes of our climate at any point in time? And it is the latter that constitutes the early warning component of our information that we provide. So here I'm really looking at the entire season ahead, looking at June until November, as you had correctly pointed out, Amanda. So without further ado, I just want to let you know what we expect, what we've seen so far, what we expect normally happens, what we expect this year will be different than an average wet or hurricane season, and how that will play out for us. After I make this presentation, then Dr. Roché Mahon, also from CIMH, will lead you into one of the major products that we produce every quarter together with the CTO and the Caribbean Hotel and Tourism Association. And in that bulletin that we call the Caribbean Tourism Climatic Bulletin, you will find a lot more information on the implications and remediatory action to mitigate and to prepare for impending climate hazards, but also to reap the benefits of opportunities that arise. So let me get started by talking a little bit, very briefly, on what recently happened. Why do we always look as meteorologists and climatologists as what recently happened? Well, I'm sure you can very well imagine that if you come out of a dry season and there's been forest fires or bushfires, or there's been a lack of water, and then we enter a wet season and the start of the wet season should be dry, that's maybe not so good news, because that means that you're left with drought as a hazard lasting longer. However, if it is that the wet season is expected to be particularly wet, then there should soon be an end to the drought. So it's always important to know where we start from. And in that context, what have we seen over the last 6 months? Well, if you look at the map on the right side here, we don't need to go into the details, but just interpret the blue colors as very wet conditions, whereas the reddish colors depict very dry conditions over the last 6 months or so. So what we see is that particularly in the Southern Caribbean and the Guianas, there have been excessive rains over the past 6 months. That is quite common in the Southern Caribbean, but in this case, it came along with quite a bit of flooding here and there in the Guianas, especially in Suriname this year. On the contrary, if you look here in northern Jamaica, southeastern Cuba, parts of Haiti, but also locally in the Eastern Caribbean, there has been moderate or worse drought. And so that was the situation that we came out of as we are now entering what we call the wet season, which largely overlaps with the hurricane season. So that's what happened with our rainfall. In terms of temperatures, well, it should be noted that December to March is the cool season around the Caribbean. That doesn't mean that we necessarily have cold temperatures. It simply means that heat waves are not a concern. In other words, the heat does not excessively affect us in those 4 months. So those are also the 4 months that coincide with the largest number of tourists in many countries of our region. But what has also happened on the global scale that has affected us in the Caribbean is that we had a so-called La Nina event in the tropical Pacific. What is La Nina? It's simply when you have colder than usual ocean temperatures around the tropics in the Pacific. And that La Nina condition persisted from 2020 until March 2023. So we're now out of a La Nina. Why is this important? Because La Nina is the primary cause of the excessive rainfalls that we've seen in the Southern Caribbean versus the dryness that we've observed in Cuba, for instance. But now, why am I mentioning this La Nina? Not because I want to go very technical, but because we are entering the opposite phase in the Pacific. So going from colder than usual to warmer than usual. So that leads me straight from looking at what recently happened to what we can expect next. And as I said, in the Pacific, El Nino, so that means when the tropical Pacific Ocean is actually warmer than it usually is, what happens is that it ejects a lot of heat out of the ocean into the atmosphere, and the atmosphere carries it over the Caribbean. In doing so, what's going to happen? El Nino will boost heat. On the other hand, it will also suppress rainfall, hurricane season activity, which is of course a good thing, and flood potential. So in terms of the hazard that is boosted by El Nino is primarily heat, but on the positive side, we will not have as high chances of extreme rainfall, not as high chances of an extreme hurricane season, or a lot of flooding. But that's just half the story, unfortunately. What is also important in defining the climate conditions this year as compared to a regular year is that the tropical North Atlantic Ocean, depicted here in this red box, as you can see, it colors red. When it colors red, it means that it's warmer than usual. If it is warmer than usual, what does that mean for our climate? Well, similar as an El Nino, it boosts heat, but it also boosts humidity because the ocean gets rid of its excess heat by means of evaporation. And if you have more humidity in the atmosphere and more heat, this boosts rainfall. It boosts hurricane season activity, unfortunately, and it also boosts flood potential. So if you take those two factors together, it's like they're in some sort of boxing match. El Nino will suppress rainfall, hurricane season activity, and flood potential, while a warm Atlantic will boost rainfall, hurricane season activity, and flood potential. And so we don't know at this time which one will be dominant in with respect to those hazards. What we do know very confidently is that we're going to see a lot of heat in coming months. So how is our climate going to respond in coming months? Well, let's start by the month of June. In June, we can expect an increase in rainfall and wet days, particularly in those countries of the Eastern Caribbean where we're just getting into the wet season. But rainfall will be increasing across the region. That also means at the same time that we will have a decrease in short 1 week or 2 week long dry spells, which is good for agricultural production, but is also good in limiting fire hazards. Finally, generally we can expect high temperatures for this month, but few heat waves, fortunately. Going into our summer now, from July to October, we will see a marked increase in heat stress, especially during heat waves. Along with that, there will be an increase in tropical cyclone activity, as is usually the case. At the peak of our hurricane season, we're going to see very shortly when it happens, but it falls in this period. And there will be a high potential for flooding rains. As we move into the end of the hurricane season or the wet season, We will see, fortunately, a steady decrease in heat stress as we move back out of what we now call the heat season in the Caribbean, which lasts from April or May until October, and into the cool season, which starts in December. There will also be a decrease in tropical cyclone activity, but there will still remain a high potential for flooding rains. So if we just keep those headlines in mind, how can we further characterize some of this? Well, let's look at hurricane season activity. Here on this graph, you can look at the dates from June the 1st all the way up to November 30th. So from left to right, when do we see most of our major hurricanes and are named tropical storms? Well, that is around the 10th of September. But in general, from August all the way to October, that's when the peak season for hurricanes occurs. And what do we expect for this season? Because I know that many of you have been wondering about that. Well, what we do at CIMH is consult the most credible sources of information, given the history of their work and also the quality of the science that they put into their work. And so we have here 4 agencies external to CIMH, and then also CIMH producing hurricane season activity forecasts. In terms of numbers that we normally have, well, we have about 14 named storms. Named storms, to remind you, is tropical storm strength, hurricane force strength, or major hurricane strength. Out of those 14 named storms, about half of them grew into hurricanes, and 3 of them grew into major hurricanes. The last thing that is mentioned here is the accumulated cyclone energy, which you could see as a higher number indicating more energy being displaced by all the storms in the year. So on average, we get about a number of 123. If you look at the first 3 columns of forecasts, so CSU, that's the Bill Gray forecast. Tropical Storm Risk is a private company in the UK. The Weather Company is what we know publicly as the Weather Channel. And those forecasts were made in the month of April. I want to single out those 3 first, because in April, we weren't sure yet if the El Nino would manifest and how warm the Atlantic would be. But even in that case, all 3 of them showed activity very close to the average, with about 12 to 15 named storms, 6 or 7 hurricanes, and 2 or 3 major hurricanes. But the total energy displaced by the hurricanes would be slightly reduced compared to average. Come now May, and El Nino has declared itself as very likely coming, and the Atlantic has warmed up rapidly. And so what we expected and what we see in our forecast is a slight uptick in the activity because of the warming Atlantic Ocean temperatures. And so if you look at NOAA, that's the US National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, which houses the National Weather Service of the US, and CIMH, we forecast still a season that will be around about average, but maybe slightly more active than the forecast issued in the month of April. Here is just a list that I know you know to consult with the National Hurricane Center, and more importantly, with your National Meteorological Services. And after those 21 storms, God forbid that we should have more this year, but if there are more, there's a separate list that will be employed. But again, the forecast for now does not suggest an extremely active season. So that's with the hurricanes. Now let's talk about heat. Heat, if you remember, is the one factor which we are very confident about will be probably worse than it usually is over the summer months, over the heat season. So in terms of temperature now, we forecast that daytime temperatures will be at least as warm as usual across most of the region for the 6 months in general, and that higher nighttime temperatures will be felt by most through November. What does that mean in terms of implications? It means that there will be increased heat stress in the vulnerable population and small livestock. And that is peaking in different times of the year, depending on where you are located. So you can see July to September in the Bahamas and Greater Antilles, August to October in the Lesser Antilles, and September to November in the Guianas. Why will there be a peak in heat stress? Well, primarily when there will be recurring heat waves. And yes, there will be heat waves for most on at least 15 days out of this 6-month period, and possibly more than 1 month worth spent in heat waves. So let's make sure that we prepare for that, because there will be enhanced cooling need through the month of October. Now, one more hazard I want to briefly mention here that will be of note in the coming months is flash floods and flooding as a result of intense rains. Now, here you see a kind of a risk scale whereby blue means very low risk or marginal, and dark red means extremely high risk, which means that it's very likely that you're going to get flooding rains. If you look throughout the region, there's a lot of areas where there's at least moderate to high flash flood potential. So keep that in mind, that flash flooding is one of the hazards that we will be monitoring closely and that you should be prepared for. So again, in summary, what should we prepare for in the next 6 months? On the one hand, humid heat waves, and in the ocean also marine heat waves. And I would like to note that it could be, I don't expect it to, but it could actually be as hot as the hottest years on record in the Caribbean, which were 2016 and 2020. So what does it mean? We need to prepare for heat stress, for compound hazards. For instance, if you remember Hurricane Maria, we all know what happened in terms of devastation of Dominica, but Puerto Rico had a lot of casualties, which were not directly caused by the hurricane itself, but by a heat wave that happened just after the hurricane, when most people that are vulnerable were not finding shelter from the heat. So keep in mind that heat is often implicated in compound hazards, along with hurricanes and others. And the marine heat waves I'm just mentioning because we do expect that there's a high chance for coral bleaching, especially going on from September to November. The other side of things is the tropical cyclone activity and intense rains, which will peak from August through October and November. So that means we need to prepare for floods and cascading hazards, wind and storm surge impacts, and compound hazards. But I'm sure that Roché and my colleague from CDEMA will shed a better light on how to prepare and how to mitigate. The main point is keep yourself updated. And how can we do that? Well, all of our Met services monitor, update, and forecast on a range of hazards related to weather and climate. And so one of the ways in which you can find information on climate is by talking to your Met services or looking through the bulletins that they issue. At the regional level, and this will segue into Roché's presentation, the flagship bulletin for the tourism sector is what we call the Caribbean Tourism Climatic Bulletin. So that's it for me. Thank you very much, and I look forward to a fruitful discussion.
And thank you for a very comprehensive overview of the seasonal forecast, Dr. Van Meerbeeck. Very, very insightful, and I think it behooves us to really pay attention to the weather forecast as we navigate the various hazards, including droughts and other conditions, heat waves, during this June to November period. So with that, I am pleased to welcome the next presenter, Dr. Roché Mahon, who is the social scientist at the Caribbean Institute for Meteorology and Hydrology. And she will present, as was mentioned, on the Tourism Climatic Bulletin jointly produced by the CTO, CHTA, and CIMH. Over to you, Dr. Mahon.
Thank you so much, Amanda. Can I have confirmation that you're seeing my presentation?
I am indeed.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, everyone, colleagues. It is a great pleasure for CIMH to have this opportunity to address this meeting. Cédric and I bring principal, Dr. David Farrell, as well as his staff at the Caribbean Institute for Meteorology and Hydrology. We want you to know that we are here to support the region's quest for sustainable development. And of course, that includes sustainable tourism development. Many of us know that we are the most tourism dependent region in the world. And for this reason, CIMH has prioritized working with the tourism sectors. Tourism sector, we thank our partners at the CTO and CHTA for being strong partners, as well as their representatives, Amanda Charles, of course, and Loretto Duffy-Myers, with whom we at CIMH work most intimately as co-authors on the Caribbean Tourism Climatic Bulletin. And so I think that for us in the Met community, forums like this that allow us to expand our reach is very important. It really gives us an opportunity to come together and to share our knowledge and tools. And so we thank the CTO for convening this session. So it's a pleasure for me to continue the conversation that Cédric has started. I think he's done a great job showcasing our work on climate early warning information. Now, as you know from his presentation, we are the Caribbean Regional Climate Center that's hosted at CIMH. In collaboration with our network of Caribbean Met services, we produce a range of technical products. So we have climate monitoring products, and we also have climate forecast products. And these products give you information on a range of climate variables like drought, rainfall, temperature, and we even provide early warning of coral bleaching. So we do have, for instance, a Caribbean coral reef watch that will give you that type of information. Now, if you put these products together on the monitoring and forecast sides of the spectrum, what you get is climate early warning information months in advance. And that's because if you know a bit about recent climate conditions, which effectively become your baseline conditions, and then you know a bit about what climate is forecasted to look like in the upcoming 3 to 6 months, then this can give you a competitive advantage because it presents an opportunity for many tourism operators to make better decisions once these decisions are climate sensitive. And I think this is really important because, for example, one of the things that our research, our early research with tourism practitioners revealed as at the start of our working relationship with the tourism sector all the way back in 2015 and 2016, what that research revealed interestingly, was that while awareness and use of weather forecasts is quite high among tourism practitioners, there's actually relatively low awareness of the existing seasonal and other longer-term climate information products that are available at regional and national levels. So I think we really need to increase the visibility of existing climate information on timescales outside of weather. And as you saw from Cédric's presentation, there's a whole suite of early warning information on the seasonal climate timescale that can be put to really good use by the sector. And so with the products we routinely produce every month, we believe that the Institute has been supporting the region and the tourism sector to engage in climate risk management, which is a coordinated and systematic process in which climate information is used to reduce the risk associated with climate variability and climate change, and to take advantage of opportunities. And so in this presentation, we'll talk a bit more about what are some of those risks, aside from what, or in addition to what Cédric highlighted, and opportunities for the sector in the upcoming 3 to 6 months. But for now, I want to focus on the key strides that we've made to co-develop tailored climate early warning information specifically for the tourism sector. And this is where CIMH's investment in partnerships for the development of that specific tailored information was quite critical. And so, as you see from this slide, the lead organizations on climate and tourism in the Caribbean, so the CIMH, as well as the CTO and CHTA, we're very serious about working together. And some of you may know the people in this in these photos, Carolyn Trubetskow, who was a past president of the CHTA, as well as Hugh Riley, who was a past Secretary General of the CTO, you know, really two Caribbean tourism stalwarts, signing a long-term collaborative letter of agreement with CIMH Principal Dr. David Farrell. At the time, this was really historic. This was, as you can see, all the way back to 2016. And we're happy to report that our partnership with the CTO and CHTA to co-design, co-develop, and co-deliver climate information products that are tailored to the sector is still going strong. And we've since signed at least 2 more LOAs to continue to work together all the way into 2023. So this is all part of a larger regional cross-sectoral alliance for climate services. You see the schematic to the bottom left of your screen, and that alliance is called the Consortium of Sectoral Early Warning Information Systems Across Climate Timescales, or UESACS coordination partners. That was established in 2015. CIMH currently chairs and coordinates this mechanism, and we work with the CTO and the CHT as public and private sector tourism partners on that consortium. I would say we've had success so far with that model, and today we'll focus on the success we've had with the Caribbean Tourism Climatic Bulletin, or the Caribbean TCB, for short, which is jointly co-authored and co-delivered by the CTO, the CHD, and CIMH since May 2017. In fact, we're 24 issues in, and we are going to develop our 25th issue next week for the June, July, August period. Now, we consider the TCB as our premier integrated tourism climate early warning product. Essentially, it is a climate smart tool that helps tourism businesses and policymakers in the Caribbean to better manage climate risk and to capture climate opportunities. Now, how does it do that? Well, it does that by offering hoteliers and policymakers climate early warning information that's drawn from about 7 of CIMH's technical products. And we believe that this information is helping tourism practitioners not just to identify, but also to prepare for favorable or otherwise inclement climate conditions, not just here in the Caribbean, but also in source markets before they occur, actually up to 3 months in advance, because this is actually a quarterly bulletin that's released ahead of the 3-month period. So perhaps the most useful information provided in the Caribbean Tourism Climatic Bulletin are the climate advisories, which provides implications of forecasted seasonal climate in a number of key areas relating to hotel operations and destination management. And we provide these advisories, as I said before, both for the Caribbean, as well as for source markets in North America and Europe. And I'm showing you slides for information that was developed for the same period, June, July, August 2022. Now, from the research that we've done, colleagues, what we found is that tourism practitioners do use this information. They do consult the Caribbean TCB, for instance, for a range of decisions relating to guest management, relating to how to anticipate extreme conditions in the upcoming 3-month period, either in the region or in source markets. They also use it to inform their emergency management decisions. Now, as I said before, we haven't yet developed the June, July, August issue of the Caribbean TCB. We'll do this next week with colleagues at CTU and CHTA. But in the interim, we can have a discussion on what are some tourism sector implications that are likely to be messaged out, not only in the June, July, August issue, but the September, October, November issue that will follow. So let's begin with the first 3-month period. And this period, of course, covers June, July, August. We call it the early wet season, which is also the Atlantic hurricane season. So what are some of the key implications during this period? Well, I've identified some of these under 4 major headings. And of course, these aren't exhaustive. There may be others, but we begin with emergency management. So in this period, tourism operators are advised to constantly monitor weather advisories issued by your local, national meteorological services. I know CDEMA also augments some of these advisories, particularly in situations where impact seems quite likely. You can also source information from the U.S. National Hurricane Center, but in all instances, you should abide by the official advisories issued by the National Meteorological Service in your country, as they are the official warning service for territories in the Caribbean. So at all times, we are advising that operators should maintain a state of readiness as we go forward in the season. With regards to guest management, in this period, we learned earlier that warmer than normal temperatures and humidity levels are likely to occur. And these conditions do have implications for beach-loving tourists, particularly the elderly and the young, who are especially vulnerable. And so heat discomfort and heat stress risk is likely to increase in this upcoming period. And as a result, we can expect that there will be increased cooling and hydration needs for tourists, especially those vulnerable tourist subpopulations. Now, let's look at implications for energy operations. We just need for enhanced cooling. So, of course, that comes at a greater cost. So operators can expect that cooling costs may start to increase in this period, especially in the Bahamas and the Greater Antilles, the Lesser Antilles, and the Guyanas. And with regards to outdoor activities, there is the likelihood of possible disruption as the potential for long-term flooding and flash floods increase from June to late August, particularly in the Greater Antilles and the Leeward Islands. We also know that this region is impacted by sargassum bleaching. This is expected to continue during this period. And yes, I've talked about many risks so far related to climate, but there is an opportunity for destinations. And here we've identified particularly destinations reliant on an ecotourism model. Those destinations are likely to see a better ecotourism experience in the coming 3 to 6 months, as increased rainfall gives way for more lush rainforests. Now, what about the late wet season, which also coincides with the late hurricane season, covering the period September, October, and November 2023? Well, we know that tropical cyclone activity historically peaks in this period. The potential for flooding and flash floods is high. Landslide potential also increases in this period in areas with high topography. The heat season also peaks in this period. So what are the implications for tourism? Well, with regards to emergency management, in this 3-month period, we could expect that extreme cases of higher than normal rainfall or extreme wet spells from an increase in severe weather systems passing through the region may lead to floods, which have historically led to damage to coastal hotel property. It's also led to failure of critical infrastructure in the past. Airports, roads, bridges have all been impacted in the past. We can also possibly expect disruption to airline schedules and airlift into the region and out of the region. In addition, to other more infrastructural damage. So as in the previous 3-month period, I think tourism operators are being advised to maintain a state of readiness and to have contingency plans to deal with some of these possible eventualities. With regards to guest management, well, remember that the heat season peaks in this period, so we can expect increased heat stress among visitors as the heat season peaks around September. But of course, we would expect some relief from November onwards. With regards to emergency operations, energy operations, there is an increased cooling need. So the need for AC and water consumption, as well as water-related activities, so showers, pool use, that increases, and the associated costs also peak in this period. With regards to outdoor activity, there's possible disruption to outdoor activities, again, as the potential for long-term flooding and flash floods increase in this period. With regards to a very important tourist attraction, our coral reefs, they may be at risk of bleaching due to unusually warm sea surface temperatures in this period. And of course, there are risks, but again, for ecotourism-based destinations, they likely to see better ecotourism experience in this period. So in closing, colleagues, I want to encourage everyone on this call to please consider using not just weather forecasts, but also using seasonal climate information to inform your decision making. We also want to encourage you to please subscribe, please visit the Caribbean RCC website, where you'll find the entire range of early warning products. Sign up to receive the quarterly TCB. You see the email address there. We'll be very happy to include you. And finally, please share what you've learned on this meeting today with others in your professional circle, with other colleagues in the industry, so that they too can benefit from this information. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your attention. I now give over to the chair. Thank you, Amanda.
And thank you very much, Roché, Dr. Mahon, for an excellent presentation. It is always a pleasure to work with you and Cédric at the CIMH to produce the Tourism Climatic Bulletin. Not forgetting, of course, Loretto from the CHTA that complements the team that really works on this bulletin. As a sector, we appreciate the collaboration and the capacity building and being able to work together to receive the forecast 3 months in advance with recommendations and strategies for the sector. Thanks again.
No problem.
I am now pleased to welcome the final presenter, Mr. Rasheed Pinder, who is the Program Officer for Preparedness and Response at the Caribbean Disaster Emergency Management Agency, CDEMA, and his presentation will focus on key considerations for disaster preparedness with recommendations and guidelines for the tourism sector. Thank you, and over to you, Mr. Pinder.
Thank you, Amanda. And I want to say thank you to my colleagues, Dr. Mahon and Dr. Van Meerbeeck, for setting the stage, given the outlook of the 2023 hurricane season, given the outlook of those associated hazards as well. So what I am going to do this morning is first, I'm gonna set the context as it relates to the impacts of these hazards. So the first thing I would like to mention is that of the regional multi-hazard context. It's a situation where today, of course, we continue to face the hydrometeorological hazards, such as tropical cyclones, hurricanes, drought, of course, flooding, storm surge, etc. And of course, the impacts of climate change and climate variability are exacerbating these phenomena. However, observed in the region today, which again affects all sectors, including the tourism sector, is that of multiple hazards. Within the last decade or so, we've been seeing a heightened amount of tremors, earthquakes. Just 2021, we had the most recent earthquake within Haiti. Across 2022 and 2021, we had numerous flooding, which led to landslides. Of course, we can't forget the volcanic eruption in 2021 in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, which not only impacted St. Vincent and the Grenadines and all sectors across that state, but also other Caribbean states as well. Given the wind direction, the ashfall across Barbados, St. Lucia, Grenada, and many other islands, noting the direct impacts, the cascading impact, and then of course noting these hazards were not only happening by themselves, but simultaneously as well. And of course, we could never forget the COVID-19 pandemic, which was within the height of this period. So just capturing the context of that multi-hazard arena that we face now in the region, that we face across all sectors, including the tourism sector. Now, of course, us at the Caribbean Disaster Emergency Management Agency, what we do, we focus on comprehensive disaster management. Comprehensive disaster management being that of the management of all hazards through all phases of the disaster management cycle by all stakeholders involved. And of course, that includes yourselves across the stakeholders across the tourism sector and all other individuals such as the NGOs, governments, etc., taking us all through the cycle. Now, I won't focus that much on this slide. I was going to go through a bit of the Atlantic hurricane season, but we would have already seen from Dr. Van Meerbeeck the predictions from the Colorado State University, two other entities, and then the predictions from that of the CIMH. We note that it is predicted to be around an average hurricane season this year, and Cédric would have taken us through the analysis of this. What I will say though is, though it is predicted to be an average season, we in the Caribbean know that it only takes one, and it only takes one to cause devastating impacts across the Caribbean. It could be one island, it could be multiple islands. And what I've done for this forum this morning is I just provided an example as it relates to the Bahamas and Hurricane Dorian. As we all may know, Hurricane Dorian unleashed devastating impacts to the multi-island archipelago of the Bahamas in 2019. Now, according to the IDB's assessment report on Hurricane Dorian, Dorian directly impacted two major tourism destinations of the Bahamas and disrupted the tourism flow in the rest of the archipelago for several days. Of course, these two major islands that were impacted was that of Abaco and Grand Bahama. And you know, in some locations, these damages were indeed catastrophic. According to this report, the estimated damages was that of $530 million across the tourism sector, and then with huge estimated losses as well. And this loss and damage not only came from the direct impacts to the tourism sector, but across the supply chain. So as it related to the logistics, the movement of people, the movement of resources, as it related to the impacts across the agricultural sector and inputs needed to produce varying outputs at that tourism level. All of this was directly impacted by the effects and the impacts of Hurricane Dorian. Now, what can be done to sort of mitigate against this in terms of disaster preparedness and guidelines for recommendations for the tourism sector? Now, this can be tackled at varying levels. So if you take your eyes to the screen and you look at the levels of disaster risk management implementation in the Caribbean tourism sector, you would see how it's outlined in the varying levels that this can be tackled. As we look at the strategic level or the policy level, it's a case where a number of policies can be drafted, developed, and rolled out to be followed in accordance with. Now, these, of course, should be rolled out or could be rolled out by varying governments, line ministries, development agencies, regional organizations such as CTO, such as the Caribbean Hotel and Tourism Agency, Ministry of Tourism's, looking at that tactical level now and then looking at that implementation, because of course you can have the rollout and the development of these policies, of these protocols, of these guidelines, but then we need to see the implementation of such within the tourism destination, within the hotels, within the accommodation, across the supply chain. This should be implemented by the destination managers, by the national representatives, definitely by the varying associations and the sub-regional authorities. And then, of course, we have to look at that operational level on the ground, that day-to-day level, looking at the business managers, the developers, of course, the staff who would be occupying and using this space, this tourism ground, this tourism industry for their livelihood. Of course, the local authorities as well. When you look at that community level, that community or local level on the ground as well, and of course the individual and family level as well. Now, I'm going to highlight a number of things across this slide because this entails a number of the activities or the initiatives that can be done and should be done to ensure some level of resiliency and redundancy across the tourism space in the region. And I'll just go from 1 to 12, you know, the establishment of the Tourism Emergency Management Committee. So having that establishment of national committee and a regional body as well, but within that national committee to have that Emergency Tourism Management Committee developing with a number of cells, whether you have your telecommunications, whether you have your communications, you have your damage and needs, you have your varying, all your logistics and relief, you have your varying cells established upon this committee. Completing multi-hazard risk assessment plan. So developing plans for the multi-hazard context and analyzing the risk and moving to suit. Identifying and equip the emergency command center. So, you know, you identify where you would have this command center, and then you identify the resources required to equip the center. So you compile the list of emergency resources and personnel, all of the equipment and supplies that are needed to house within this center and just sometimes within the accommodation spaces and the tourism spaces. Establish mutual aid agreements, establish and test emergency procedures. 6 and 7, I believe, are critical, you know, establish and test those emergency procedures, utilizing early warning systems to develop SOPs. So ensuring that you draft your standard operating procedures, and then to ensure that you have tabletop and even functional exercises at times to test these SOPs, to test these measures across the system being developed. Of course, this ties hand in hand with 8, which is to train the staff, have the staff well trained in accordance with the policy, in accordance with the plans, in accordance with the procedures and the guidelines, develop awareness programs for all staff, and develop information materials for tourists and guests. And of course, those drills and exercises I would have just mentioned. And of course, important is to continue to revise, update these plans and these procedures. Now, again, if you take your eyes to the screen, you would see an example of how the tourism response structure could be done as it relates to, from the National Emergency Operational Center, having all members, including a tourism liaison officer, the representatives from the TMC at the NEOC, and then branching off into how the Tourism Emergency Operations Center could be developed in terms of variant cells and variant focal points within, which would tie into that national mechanism, which would tie into that comprehensive disaster management system. Now, sort of to summarize, what I was saying in short is to have that business continuity planning process for the tourism sector and the tourism space regionally and nationally, as well as it relates to prevention, ensure to have that prevention risk management plan. In terms of preparedness, you know, that business impact analysis. So you analyze what is the possibility and you prepare. You have your tabletops, you have your functional exercises, you have your drills. As it relates to the response, definitely you have your incident response plan. Definitely you construct your tourism emergency operational center and you embed a liaison officer within the NEOC to respond. And as it relates to recovery, of course, you have your early recovery and your long-term recovery plans as well. And then key within the middle is to rehearse, maintain, and to review, to keep up to date, definitely from that policy level or the top of the pyramid and the hierarchy, definitely down to the community and the individual level at the bottom. And that is it for me this morning. Just a quick short overview in terms of the disaster preparedness guidelines and recommendations for the tourism sector. I'd like to thank you, and I will hand back over to the chair this time. Amanda, back over to you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pinder. The recommendations and guidelines that you mentioned are well received and noted. I believe, I concur, we believe as the CTO that preparedness is key, and not just developing plans and procedures, but implementation, continual monitoring and improvement as needed. So thank you for those timely reminders. Additionally, the Tourism Emergency Management Committee, which currently exists in, I believe, Barbados, Jamaica, and the Bahamas, it is a regional best practice, and it's something that we want all countries to adopt. Thanks again. There was one question in the chat related to whether the presentations would be made available. We will get the permission from the various presenters to do so. But what is important is that we will circulate the recording so everyone can have access to the information. I now hand over to Mr. Neil Walters as we come to the end of today's forum. And Neil Walters is the Acting Secretary General of the CTO. He will deliver the vote of thanks and closing remarks. Thank you. Over to you, Neil.
Hi, good morning, good afternoon, sorry. Just missed it by 1 minute, Amanda, and good afternoon to all of our participants and our speakers, of course. It is my distinct pleasure to deliver the vote of thanks on behalf of the CTO Secretariat after such an informative forum. I think those of us who were listening would have learned quite a bit, and I certainly paid rapt attention to what was being said, even though some of it we might have heard before. A good refresher is always welcome, and also very pertinent today as we start the season, as mentioned by Chairman Bryan. So first, let me thank the Honorable Kenneth Bryan, who is the Chairman of the CTO Council of Ministers and Commissioners of Tourism, and the Minister of Tourism and Ports for Cayman Islands, for setting the tone and the context for today's discourse during his opening remarks. I also extend thanks to Dr. Cédric van Meerbeeck, who is the climatologist at the CIMH, for providing a comprehensive climatic outlook and hurricane season forecast for the period June to November 2023. Thanks also to Dr. Roché Mahon, social scientist at CIMH, for presenting a detailed overview of the Tourism Climatic Bulletin produced by the CTO-CHTA-CIMH and the Caribbean Hotel and Tourism Association. That bulletin continues to serve as a very relevant tool to contribute to tourism sector resilience, and we are grateful to the CIMH for the ongoing collaboration and support. Like the CIMH, the CTO has a long-standing relationship with the Caribbean Disaster Emergency Management Agency, CDEMA. And I would like to thank the CDEMA representative, Mr. Rasheed Pinder, who is a program officer for preparedness and response, for the very timely recommendations and guidance provided in his presentation, which were essentially considerations for disaster preparedness, recommendations, and guidelines for the sector. In his opening remarks, our chairman highlighted the critical nature of the multiple hazards which confront the regional tourism sector, foremost of which are climatic-related hazards induced by global climate variability and climate changes. Our expert panelists further highlighted the climate-sensitive nature of tourism and pointed to the need for the sector to engage in comprehensive disaster management with a focus on climate risk reduction. The CTO fully endorses these recommendations, which call for a coordinated process whereby information is used to identify and prepare for related risks in order to capitalize on opportunities to improve resilience and benefit from avenues for risk financing. In this regard, I would like to reiterate the need for the tourism, public and private sectors to continue to work together, as this strengthens the ability to jointly access funding and technical assistance to implement the requisite policies, strategic intervention, and garner support for the necessary infrastructure improvements so as to increase destination resilience, long-term sustainability, and contingency planning. We heard today that the region remains vulnerable to ongoing threats of climate variability and climate change, hurricanes, droughts, and other climatic-induced hazards. As such, adaptation, mitigation, and preparedness should form the cornerstone of future tourism planning. The tourism sector is multifaceted by its very nature, integrates multiple sectors, and is dependent on and influenced by external factors. Intersectoral and interinstitutional collaboration at the national and regional level is key to effectively address the many challenges we face together as a sector, mindful of competing priorities and resource constraints. The CTO remains committed to supporting and working in collaboration with its members and development partners towards increasing tourism sustainability and resilience. In closing, I would like to make mention of two key resources developed by the CTO to support capacity building in disaster management. Firstly, the Multi-Hazard Risk Management Guide, which provides various templates and guidelines, including those just outlined by Mr. Pinder. And secondly, the online course in disaster risk management, which is available free for all CTO members via the CTO online training platform, the Caribbean Tourism Institute. I encourage you all to refer to and utilize these resources as you plan your own national and business disaster management and hurricane preparedness activities. Thank you all again for our participants, for making the time to attend today's forum. And I can't forget my team at the CTO Secretariat for the outstanding work in putting this together with our partners, CDEMA and CDEMA. And finally, I urge us all to monitor the wealth of available information sources outlined today and stay safe during this season. I thank you. Back to you, Amanda.
Thank you very much, Mr. Walters. Thanks to all for joining us. And once again, thank you to the minister and our expert panelists. Stay safe, everyone, and have a good day.